While many know Ganon as the primary villain of the Legend of Zelda series, there's actually been a multitude of other adversaries that Link has had to challenge throughout the 35-year history of the game series. So today, we're going to rank every Legend of Zelda villain. Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Ryan here from Game Essays. This channel is all about covering some of my favorite game series, including The Legend of Zelda and Pokemon. If you enjoy the content on this channel, I highly encourage you to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and even that bell that everybody always tells you to hit, because it really does help. So anyway, getting into today's content, we are talking about Legend of Zelda Villain. So we've covered every version of Zelda, we've covered every version of Link, we've covered every version of Ganon. So if you want to see those videos, definitely check those out. But now we're going to look at, there's a whole bunch of other villains in the Legend of Zelda series besides Ganon. Ganon is on this list, and we'll get him out of the way real quick. But I did want to focus in on some of those other villains that we don't always hear about as much, because Ganondorf definitely, Ganondorf and Ganon seems to always have the spotlight. But I felt it was worthwhile to rank these. So I'm going to kind of go based on character and, how important are they to the stories that the games that they're in. Some villains are not as great as others, and you'll see, and I'll kind of explain my reasoning why. But anyway, let's just start out with Ganon and slash Ganondorf. He has the unfair advantage, but he'll go right up into S tier. Ganon slash Ganondorf has been in way more games than any other Zelda villain. So for that reason, I'm going to put him in the S tier, not only because just he's had a lot of appearances, because that's kind of unfair, but because a lot of, particularly the Ganondorf appearances, his character is just really cool. He's a badass. His design's really awesome. And everybody loves Ganondorf. That's pretty much what it comes down to. He's just awesome. Wind Waker Ganondorf is a really good character. He's a lot cooler in, Twilight Princess, but then you kind of have the classic appearance in Ocarina of Time. And then, of course, he's the OG. He's been around since the NES games and A Link to the Past. And then even having, minor appearances in the Oracle games and A Link Between Worlds. So he's done it all. He's awesome. We're all excited for Breath of the Wild 2 and how Ganondorf, not only just Ganon, we've had Calamity Ganon and all that, but Ganondorf as well. We all love Ganondorf, let's be honest. So S tier, easy. But now here's where things get a little more interesting, because we're talking about some, characters that don't get as much spotlight. So how much, how interesting are they within the small situations that they're in within these games? That's what we're going to discuss. So the lady from Triforce Heroes, I'm going to be honest here. I am probably not, I don't know. I'll just throw this in the C tier for now. I haven't finished Triforce Heroes. I do plan to. Tell me if I'm wrong. I feel like I don't hear anything about this villain. So you guys let me know on this one, because it's one of the few Zelda games I have not completed. The list of Zelda games I haven't completed is a pretty short list. I think it's Four Swords Adventures. I've played most of Four Swords Adventures, but did not complete it. And then I have not completed Triforce Heroes. I think other than that, I've completed every Zelda game, every at least main series. Like, I haven't finished Cadence of Hyrule either, but I kind of don't really count that as like a main game. Anyway, let's take a look at Demise. Demise, I would probably rank as a B. I think he is a solid villain, but again, he's imprisoned, and you fight the imprisoned through most of Skyward Sword. So he's not really the one that's carrying the torch in this game through most of it, but I think what they did with him in his short amount of screen time as his true form of Demise, I thought was very good. The fact that he kind of lays the curse that is the reason for Ganondorf's continued existence, and the sort of cycle of Zelda, Link, and Ganon kind of stuck throughout all of history, repeating the same cycle over and over again. It's a very important groundwork, and that he is a pivotal part of, and he's kind of like the we have the three goddesses, and we have Hylia, and he is like the antithesis of that. So there's a lot of good lore behind him, but he just doesn't have a lot of screen time. So him as like a character isn't really developed that much, but for lore reasons and everything, I think he's at a solid B. He's not like incredible, but still really cool. Bellum goes straight into D tier. Bellum, I think, is the worst villain in all of Zelda. Really, like, not only you hear about him like midway through the game and then nothing else, and then when he shows up, he's just an eyeball monster, which if you played a lot of Zelda games, there's so many eyeball monsters. I think we get real sick of eyeball monsters by the end of playthroughs of like, I guess if you played Majora's Mask 3D or whatever, but there's plenty of other eyeball bosses all throughout Zelda. And yeah, Bellum is just not interesting at all. I mean, it does kind of take over like a ghost ship and stuff, but in my opinion, character-wise, there is no character to Bellum, really. It's just not super interesting. Dark Link. Dark Link, I think, has to get a... Dark Link has a couple of appearances and is pretty cool. I gotta give Dark Link an A. So, Dark Link's first appearance, obviously, is the main villain in Zelda 2. There's not a lot of, like, lore behind it, really. It's just kind of like the ultimate test is, like, conquering yourself in that quest for the Triforce of Courage, I guess is probably what they were going for. But he's a very formidable boss fight. And then we also see a Dark Link appearance in the Water Temple, which is really cool as well. One of the coolest mini-bosses. But then Dark Link is actually one of the key villains in Four Swords Adventures as well. So Dark Link's kind of had a number of appearances, and he's super cool. You see kind of, it's not technically Dark Link, but there's even the Twilight Princess cutscene and everything with the Dark Links. But yeah, Dark Link's actually had a pretty good history throughout the game. And like I said, the coolness factor is kind of just what brings him up. And like his real main show as a villain is definitely Four Swords Adventures. Aghanim, I think Aghanim, I'll give a B. Aghanim's pretty cool it is basically Ganon. It's just kind of like another surrogate Ganon, I guess. It's just his form in the light world as he's trying to control things and kidnap Zelda. Yeah, he's pretty cool, and there's really not too much else to say other than that, I guess. Chancellor Cole. Chancellor Cole, I think, is... I'd probably put him at a C tier. He was a big improvement over Bellum. I think Byrne was the more interesting character in Spirit Tracks. Chancellor Cole's kind of just pretty generic. He does kill Zelda, so that's pretty cool. That's pretty badass, I gotta say. But I think he's on the more forgettable side of villains for sure. That like I said, Byrne's the more interesting character, and then he's trying to resurrect Malladus, and then he gets possessed. And I guess I'll just throw Malladus into C tier with him because they're kind of, I know they're not the same, but they're kind of the same. Let's see. Onyx General Onyx from Oracle of Seasons, I think is also a C tier, but I'd probably put him a little bit below Chancellor Cole. There's just like not much going on with him. He, I guess, is in Hyrule Historia or the Encyclopedia says he's like he was in the Dark World with Ganon in A Link to the Past, and then Twin Rova calls him to get, I think, Din's Flame in that game, but he doesn't really do much. His boss fight at the end, like, there's a lot going on, and it's pretty tough, but the whole like dragon form and everything, like the dragon form is pretty cool, but there's just really not much going on with him throughout the game. Ghirahim, I think, is an S tier. Way more interesting to me than Demise and way more fun. He is trying to obviously kidnap Zelda so that he can resurrect Demise. And he does eventually kind of succeed in that, I think. Like, obviously Demise comes back, but anyway, Ghirahim is awesome. He's fun. You fight him multiple times throughout the game. He's just a very well built up villain. And yes, ultimately he is just kind of like the antithesis to Fi, but yeah, and he's just kind of a means to an end to get Demise, but he succeeds in, resurrecting Demise, and he's just a determined, fun character that has some interesting boss fights. So Ghirahim definitely is an S tier in my opinion. I think Majora, and it has Skull Kid and Majora, I kind of see them as one of the same, so I'll just put the Skull Kid Majora up there. And then we'll leave the other one down there, because Skull Kid without Majora's Mask isn't gonna do anything. He's a friend. He's not gonna be a villain. So I really just view them as one and the same. But anyway, Majora I think is also an S tier. There's a lot of mystery and intrigue behind the mask and the origins of the mask. It was used in like hexing rituals by this dark tribe. And then if it gets into the wrong hands, obviously you see dangerous things can happen. The moon is falling. There is, Majora is doing some crazy stuff. And it's just one of the most mysterious yet interesting and cool villains throughout all of Zelda. And there's probably no way it will ever come back into a game, but I still think for like a one game villain, Majora is one of the best you can possibly do. Like Ghirahim and Majora are really up there as some of the best. Koga, I think Koga's fun, but again, there's not a ton going on there. So I think Koga's a C tier. The boss fight's fun, but yeah, I don't know. There's just not enough going on. And maybe that's my excuse for a lot of these, but the whole Yiga clan thing is fun, and the boss fight is fun, but he's not super interesting as a villain. He's just like a good comic relief for the game. I'm not sure. The Nightmare, I don't know if there's another name for this, but please let me know in the comments. I might. But the Nightmare in Link's Awakening, basically, I would say is I would throw that up in the B tier, because it is very interesting that it's almost, if you wake up, then Koholint Island disappears. So the Nightmare, I think, is trying to keep the the eternal sleep going or whatever, but Link is almost playing the villain in this scenario. So there's a lot of intrigue there. The villain itself is pretty tough too. But yeah, I think it makes you question things, which I think is good. Because yeah, like I said, Link is almost the villain, because when he wakes up the Windfish, then the whole world that he's come to know will disappear and all the people that exist within it. But it's also necessary. It's like a necessary evil that must happen, and the kind of the Nightmare thing is being kind of selfish and wants to keep that world. I kind of dig it, and I think at B, I think it's a solid B. Hilda, I'm also really not going to rank because it's more about Yuga, so I think we can throw Yuga up at I think Yuga is a B as well. Obviously Yuga is trying to get the Triforce for himself, I believe. And then he is capturing the maidens and putting them in, or the sages, and putting them in paintings. I think he's an interesting villain that kind of gets, like I said, overshadowed by the whole thing with Ganon at the end, but he ends up, using Ganon's power to empower himself. I think Yuga's very solid as a villain. Vaati, I would say, is A tier. Obviously, Vaati has the advantage of showing up in 3 games, which is Minish Cap, Four Swords, and Four Swords Adventures. I think Vaati is definitely at his best in the Minish Cap. We kind of get a lot more insight on him as like a mage and more kind of background behind that, as well as like multiple forms of Vaati that you fight. I think it's a really good conclusion to the game. And then, we have subsequent less interesting appearances by Vaati, but overall I think he's one of the stronger additional villains that they've put in the game. Veran, they cut her head off in this tier list. This is not my tier list, by the way. Someone else put this together, but poor Veran got her head cut off. But in a surprise, Veran, I actually think is an S tier villain. I think it's probably the most underrated villain in all of Zelda. While Onyx doesn't really have too much going on through the game, Veran is doing a lot, and she is possessing different people throughout the game. And then I think the Black Tower is what it's called, is being like built, and there's a lot there's a good like continued advances of the story throughout the game, and you get more of Veran and her manipulating different people and causing chaos through the land. I forget which one is which. I think it's I'm forgetting the names. I know Hollandrum is one of them. I forget which game has which land, but Labyrinth, Labyrinth. I think it's Labyrinth in Ages. Maybe I'm wrong. But anyway, Veran, I think, is a great villain. Super underrated. The fact that she, like it says, possesses people and then basically uses them to advance her agenda is really cool and interesting. And I think a lot more people, if the presentation wasn't so limited in a Game Boy Color game, like if this was on even Super Nintendo and they had less limitations with how like cinematic they could get, I think a lot more people would like Veran as a villain. But I think just the Oracle games being super limited in the storytelling that they could do, I think they did a great job with what they had. And if this got like the Switch treatment that Link's Awakening got, I think a lot more people would be like, oh, Veran's like a really good, a much better villain than I thought. Zant, I think Zant also goes up in the A tier for me, just shy of S, because, man, I was so bought in. First time playing Twilight Princess, I was all in on Zant. I thought he was like the coolest new villain. But then when you get to the end of the Palace of Twilight, I was kind of like, even though I love his boss fight, the character kind of fell apart a little bit for me. And like the whole turn into being like wacky and almost like comic relief like was a little bit of a disappointment, because Zant started as like such a badass character and I love the design so much. And like I said, that it just like the wackiness kind of threw me off there, kind of came out of nowhere. And it felt like Zant was kind of turned into a joke at the end. And like I've come to embrace kind of that part of the game more and more, but still I can't help but feel like it took a step down for me because of that. But that is all the Zelda villains. That's pretty much where it stands for me. Definitely let me know what you guys think. How would you rank the villains of Legend of Zelda? We have, 4 in the S tier and 3 in the A tier. Not too bad. But as I said, I have some other tier list videos as well as full-length reviews for both Phantom Hourglass and Wind Waker. So in the case of Phantom Hourglass, if you want to hear me crap on Bellum a little bit more, our only D tier villain, then definitely check that video out. I plan on continuing that series. Like I said, there's plenty of other tier list content on there too. So if you liked this content, please make sure to hit the subscribe button, like this video, and I will see you guys next time.